Now, one of the things that would happen each summer, it happened maybe about 2 or 3 summers, Auntie Barbara would send me to live with my uncle, Uncle Geddes. Geddes, like Geddes, Geddes is a famous name in Jamaica. And Uncle Geddes was actually, his real name was Sammy Heslop, H-E-S-L-O-P. And they called him, he was a jockey. He was very short, and he was a jockey, and they called him Shuffler. Shuffler was his nickname that they called him as a jockey. Now, my uncle was a very, very famous jockey in Jamaica. He was so famous, he actually has a legendary story where he rode a horse that was called Long Shot. And he rode Long Shot, which apparently had a pretty long shot of winning, and he won the race. And after he won the race, the horse fell, and I guess the horse must have died, but my uncle actually broke both of his legs at the time. And so it was a very, very famous story. And my uncle eventually became president of the Jockey Club in Jamaica. And at the time, there were only basically 2 major sports that was in Jamaica. There's actually 3. It was track and field, and then there's cricket, but then there was also horse racing. And horse racing was really a big deal. And we lived very close to the race course, which is where the horse raced. My uncle actually did. And so each summer I would go to spend time with my uncle at his stable, where he had all the horses there. And part of our job, and I remember my cousin and I, and my brother eventually, Michael and I, we would spend time with my uncle there, and he would give us work, tasks that he wanted us to do. And one of the things I would sidebar, my uncle had this dog, and his name was Rusty. And my uncle smoked a bong as well too, like serious weed. And when he smoked, I remember, like I told you before, that there was like a big plume of smoke, and you could hardly see his head when he smoked it with his other brother, my other uncle. But he also blew the smoke into Rusty's eyes and his face as well. So you had this dog, and it was a little mutt dog, but this dog was, I don't know what it did to him, and I don't know whether or not biologically there is any evidence to substantiate this, but I knew that the dog was extremely aggressive. And you could just go to the dog, and we lived close to the cane field, and Rusty had a number of other little minions, little smaller dogs that he actually was kind of the ringleader of, the alpha dog. And so I remember my uncle, they would just go choo, 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 hug. And it basically what that meant was there was a wild pig running around in the cane field, and Rusty and his little gang of dogs would run out there, chase after the pig, try to kill the pig. We were, my brother Michael and I and my other cousin Kamal, we were terrified of Rusty because this dog seemed unpredictable with his little gang of dogs. So we were responsible for cleaning out the stable, when my uncle, gave us tasks to do. And so sometimes my uncle would finish our task, and my uncle would leave us for the day to go off to work. And the minute my uncle would leave for work, the first thing, we would sometimes sit on top of these big giant boxes. That's where you store the hay for the horses, and so they were huge. And so my cousin and I, Kamal, would climb up on top of the box, and we would sit up there for like sometimes hours because Rusty would be walking around, and we were terrified that this dog was going to kill us like he was chasing those pigs out there. And so Rusty would occasionally wander into one of the empty stables, and the minute he did that, we would lock him in there, and then we could go out and play. And so my uncle would come home. I remember him saying to us, he's like, who keeps locking the dog in the stable? And we would go, oh, it must be one of the apprentices that is doing it. We don't know anything about it. But of course, we were absolutely guilty, of locking the dog in there. And so I also remember that we used to take the horses down to the racetrack. So, they didn't, at the time, he was very close to the racetrack, which we call the race course. And so he didn't put them in a carriage and drive them to that location. He was so close by, within maybe about a couple of miles, that he was able to. We just walked the horse along the highway, not the highway, but just the street all the way to the race course. And I would remember, the closer the horse would get to the race course, the more excited the horse would get. It's almost like he could smell the dirt or the track from there, but he would start getting, very animated. And of course, we were always terrified to make sure that we kept the horses in check, before their race. And also, I remember us going out where he would give us, we would have to go into the cane field, and we would have to go get straw, and it's something, one of the bush was called Medina. I don't know what it's called in the United States, but it's called Medina there. And it was sort of a treat for the horses. And we also went to get cut grass and bring it back to the stable for the horses. Now, one of the things that when we came to the United States, my brother and I, Michael in particular, we would see all these wonderful TV shows where the horses are nice and gentle and friendly, and we would look at each other, and we just had a completely different story, because these were race horses that we were my uncle had. And so we remember how aggressive that they were. We remember how aggressive these horses were. That these horses would kick a hole in the concrete block if they were excited. They would also, chew on the base of the cage that they were in, the stable that they were in. I remember the horses biting a couple of my uncle, and taking a chunk out and biting one of the apprentices there. So the idea of this nice, wonderful horse that they talk about in the United States, that was some kind of horse, because we don't remember those horses. We remember that these horses were much more aggressive in their demeanor. My uncle, because he was so famous, he also knew a lot of politicians. He was sort of one of the celebrities in Jamaica, and at that time you could really use his name if as a way to open some doors. He knew the prime minister. He knew a lot of. They would get him involved during the political season, etc. It was quite interesting how well known he was. Just a sidebar note. I remember. And by the way, my uncle, even though he was, very short guy, he couldn't have been over 5 feet tall. Jockeys are typically very short, and he was very short. This guy had no fear at all. And I remember that he had a machete that he actually sharpened on both sides of the machete, sort of like a sword. And people knew not to mess with Shuffler, because Shuffler was not a guy you wanted to mess with. And so at the time, I remember that my Uncle Clive, when he was beating on us and he started beating Auntie Barbara, I remember that Auntie Barbara was very hesitant to call up, Sammy or her brother, Shuffler, because she knew it was not going to end well, that he would show up with a bunch of his boys, basically, and it would have gotten ugly. And so when my uncle started beating on my aunt, eventually she called him. She picked up the phone and she called, and my Uncle Sammy showed up, and we were like, oh my God, this is not going to be good. I was not there for that, but what I was told is that for all the politeness of my uncle being proper, my Uncle Sammy basically told him very graphically, we come out of the same you-know-what body part, and if you mess with her, if you fuck with her, he's what he was going to do to my uncle. And sort of, I think my uncle kind of gulped, because he knew, which is the thing about people who are abusive. They're only abusive when he was beating on children and beating on women, but when it comes to a real man, all of a sudden, you realize he's a fucking coward. And so my uncle told him that, look, if you ever do that again, then it's not going to end well for you. And I think shortly after that, I think my aunt decided to move before it actually got uglier, because I guess she probably was avoiding, something, really terrible happening.